The virtues and attributes pertaining unto God are all evident and manifest, and have been mentioned and described in all the heavenly books. Among them are trustworthiness, truthfulness, purity of heart while communing with God, forbearance, resignation to whatever the Almighty hath decreed, contentment with the things his will hath provided, patience, nay, thankfulness in the midst of tribulation, and complete reliance in all circumstances upon him. These rank, according to the estimate of God, among the highest and most laudable of all acts. Baha'u'llah.
Thank you so much. So now I'll introduce our speaker for today, and just a reminder to save all your questions until after the talk. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith, or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that I will put in the chat. Our speaker this week is Mr. Kelly Whalen, and his topic is Applying Spiritual Principles to Innovation and Competition. Kelly Whalen is the Chief Executive Officer of CBAI Associates, a federal contractor specializing in technical and professional services. In 2016, Kelly founded Whalen Strategies, a consulting company focused on growth strategies for commercial enterprises. Prior to these ventures, Kelly was the Vice President of Industry Growth at Applied Minds in Burbank, California, which specializes in radical innovation projects for tech companies in aerospace. Kelly spent 14 years at Northrop Grumman Aerospace and held positions of Vice President for Aerospace Strategy and the Sector Vice President for Strategy, Innovation, and Business Development. He began his career at Lockheed Aircraft and worked for 16 years at the famed Skunk Works, focusing on next-generation aircraft. A Baha'i since his declaration in 1981, Kelly has served in a number of various capacities over 4 decades. And with that, I'll hand it off to Mr. Whalen.
Thank you, Bayan. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me to come back. In fact, I was just ruminating over our prior conversation, which also had to do with industry, morals, and ethics in how we work in business. A lot of the conversations that are held here in modern perspectives are based on spiritual principles and spiritual ideals. And one of the things that I draw from that is how can I bring those spiritual principles into my work life and into my other daily life. And as we think about the work life, many of us have had careers in a variety of different fields, whether we're building big industrial complexes or we're sitting at a desk where it's comfortable and we're solving interesting problems. These are all, make up a big part of our lives. We'll work for 40 years or so in an industrial setting. And, in my experience working in technology and aerospace, there have been plenty of times where I've asked the question, what are we doing here? And is it something that is beneficial to humanity? And I think a lot of us could probably answer the question in a way that says, maybe not so much. And so the purpose of this talk is to think about what would help us to reconcile a life that is motivated by spiritual principles, a life that we conduct ourselves every day, and how to bring that into the workplace. In progressive dialogue, modern dialogue, there is a substantial amount of concern raised about the ethics and the morals of companies and how they conduct themselves for either the benefit of the purpose that they serve or the benefit of the employees that help them in that purpose. And so, this is really aimed at people who ask those kinds of questions. Is innovation good? Is competition good? These seem to be the driving forces in how a lot of companies grow, how they leverage their human and their financial resources. And so I want to unpack that a little bit and see how we can apply spiritual principles to that. And hopefully we all will learn something. There will be a couple of times I ask questions. If you can answer the question in the chat, then Bayan will repeat that question to me, and then we'll engage in a little bit of an interactive dialogue. It's difficult with so many folks on the line, but hopefully we'll get 1 or 2 questions that will come forward. So that's the context of the talk. I'll refer to the Baha'i writings as we go forward, and perhaps some other resources that assist us in this journey. But first, I want to give you a quick primer on the Baha'i faith. It began in the mid 1800s. It is grown to be a world religion that intends to unite humanity. The Baha'i faith, inspired by the writings of Baha'u'llah, the Bab, which is his forerunner in Persia, and his son, Abdul Baha. There are other central figures that come along as well, and I'll refer to them. But these principal actors in this grand strategy that God has given to humanity includes not just those three central figures in the Baha'i faith, but it also includes the grand strategy I'm talking about, lessons that humanity has received by many other dispensations of the past, many other revealers of the Word of God, which intend to educate humanity. And these, as we know, are Moses and Christ and Buddha, Muhammad, and even those that are in the older archaic languages and writings that have been revealed in the Old Testament and some other documents. So altogether, what this represents is a divine plan, a plan that God has to evolve and elevate humanity for the single purpose of attaining unity and prosperity amongst all of humanity and through the fullness of time. One of the things that we are given in this dispensation is a couple of common themes. There are many themes, but there are two interesting themes as it relates to us as individuals. And that is that our responsibilities are to engage in the learning, our own spiritual learning. That is to attend to one's own spiritual and intellectual growth. Intellect and spiritual growth, those two are combined in this conversation. And also to contribute to the transformation of society. So to the extent that we can take our learning and have a contribution in elevated conversations about the future of our world that's around us, whether it's in our families, our communities, or something even more broad than that. So within that also, we recognize that the advancement of human civilization includes the material advancement, the advancement of societies and of technology, the things that make us grow and prosper as a collective organism. So we're going to talk about some of those material advancements and see how they are shaped by our spiritual understanding of things. Okay. Bayan introduced the topic as innovation and competitiveness. And the first thing I'd like to do is to define innovation and competitiveness to help us have a level set of understanding. Webster will define innovation as a new idea, a new method, or a new device, or the introduction of something new. That's the simplistic way of looking at innovation, something new, something that is done differently, for example, as it relates to a method. As Bayan mentioned, I've worked in the area of strategy and innovation for a number of years, 35 or 40 years in industry. And one of the things that I have concluded defines innovation is that it is something that precipitously increases the well-being through some means. And when I say precipitously, something that improves our current condition, and if it is disruptive, as we have seen, we'll talk about disruptive innovation, a significant increase, for example, a 10-fold increase in our ability to do something. If you think about workers who work in fields and the ability to introduce machines, so you can attain a 10-fold increase in yield in a farm, for example, without necessarily a 10-fold increase in labor. And this eases the workload of people as one example. So a significant increase in capability or capacity as well as a significant decrease in the resources that are taken to attain that. Resources meaning money or other material resources. So if we can apply that definition to the things that we have seen over time, we can build skyscrapers of many, many stories instead of single-story homes or buildings or offices. This is an example of attaining the capacity to build much larger edifices. This is just one example. We can fly 10 times as fast, or we can travel 10 times as fast in an airplane than an automobile. We can telecommunicate 10 times as fast. For example, if I want to speak to somebody, I don't have to write a letter. We have electronic means. There are many examples of this concept of innovation. As we define the idea of competition or competing one with another, the definition there is to strive consciously or unconsciously, which is an important part of this, unconsciously, for an objective, such as a position, to attain profit, a prize, some outcome that is beneficial to someone, in a state of rivalry. Competition includes the concept of rivalry, and we'll talk about the ethics of rivalry and competition. So those are the two big thoughts that we'll explore, and I will ask you to consider as you are listening to this talk that I am simply a voice, and the real truth that comes out of this conversation is a truth that you conclude in your own investigation. So no matter what I say, compare it against your own reasoning, your own faculties of reasoning and exploration of understanding, seek other sources, and draw your own conclusions. These are simply ideas that I offer to you. The concept of discovering truth is a principal concept in the Baha'i writings. It centers around independent investigation of truth, meaning the ability for you to attain an understanding of truth is given to you exclusively. Each of us is certainly open to investigate, read books, study periodicals, speak to other people, attain educational institutions, but oftentimes truth is a moving target for us. What we believe today is something that may be different tomorrow. We used to believe the world was flat. We used to believe that the solar system revolved around our point in space rather than the other way around. And over time, our scientific discovery has given us better insight into this. And this is something that each of us is responsible for attaining ourselves. Abdu'l-Baha says, happy are those who spend their days in the pursuit of knowledge, in the discovery of secrets of the universe, and in the meticulous investigation of truth. And woe to those who content themselves with ignorance, who delight in thoughtless imitation, who have fallen into the abyss of ignorant unawareness, and who have thus wasted their lives. So he encourages us to engage in the discovery of the secrets of the universe. And he says happiness is something that comes as a result of this. And so I encourage you to consider that your own self-discovery of truth will give you the happiness, not necessarily somebody else giving you their version of the truth. Shoghi Effendi, who is the grandson of Abdu'l-Baha and the caretaker of the Baha'i faith in the early part of the 1900s through the 1950s, he said this: "It is hoped that all will henceforth be led to investigate and analyze the principles of the Baha'i faith and to correlate them with modern aspects of philosophy and science." And so Shoghi Effendi is bringing together the idea of the spiritual principles, which we would find in the writings of the Baha'i faith, and their application to the sciences. So this is sort of a motivating comment that Shoghi Effendi has given, at least he's given to me. He also says, every intelligent and thoughtful person should always approach the cause, the Baha'i cause, in this way, for therein lies the very essence of the principle of independent investigation of truth. This is a universal theme. It could apply to things like science and technology that we're talking about today. But the discovery of truth would help each of us in any other endeavor that we go throughout in life, whether it's understanding the Word of God, understanding how we should conduct ourselves and live our lives, the motivations that we have day to day. So I encourage you to consider independent investigation of truth in everything, and in particularly this particular talk, because I may say some things that you may disagree with, and that's okay. So let's talk about innovation first. We'll do innovation for a bit, and then we'll do competitiveness. I provided a couple of examples of innovation, and I would certainly invite others to jot in the chat your thoughts on a particular example of innovation. And while you're at it, is that idea that comes to you innovation that is for good, or innovation that is not for good? And that would be a good part to contribute to the conversation. I'm interested in hearing others' thoughts. Also, when we think about innovation, we can cast a pretty wide net. And Bayan, feel free to interrupt me if there's a question that comes and we can field them, okay? We can cast a pretty wide net on innovation. I was thinking earlier today that there is this idea of scientific and technological invention. At the same time, when we combine those inventions into a capability, this becomes sort of the essence of innovation and moving humanity forward in some way. I'll give you one example. Each of you probably has a cell phone, smartphone, and on that phone, you probably have a navigator of some sort. So you get in your car, you're going to see a friend, or you're going to go to have lunch, meet somebody for lunch. And the person that you're meeting says, we're going to meet at this place. Here's the address. And you type that address into your navigator. And you hit the button that says, take me there. You see all the routes, and you start driving. And you trust that that navigator on your phone is going to get you there in probably the quickest amount of time. And it's probably going to get you there as safely as possible, meaning it avoids road construction, things like that. And you get there and you look at the clock and you say, wow, that was within a couple of minutes. That's really amazing. And then imagine where we were 20 years ago, and imagine where we were 50 years ago and 100 years ago, where that entire experience of traveling was different. What had to happen in order for that experience of traveling to materialize? What are all of the technologies that had to be invented and then had to be combined in such a clever way that we could be, each of us, so independent that we can get into an automobile and drive ourselves someplace, or even hire an Uber and have them do it for us, but they're using all of the same means. One of the inventions that needed to come to fruition is the invention of Global Positioning System, GPS, we call it. And these are satellites that go around in some orbital fashion around the Earth. And this constellation of satellites is beaming information to us, each one of us, all across the planet, 8 billion people. And each of us is able to interact with those systems, that network, and use it as both a source of information, our positioning, where we are in space, and where we are in time as well. It gives us timing. So GPS has nothing to do with what's on our phone, it appears, and yet it was necessary for that to come to fruition in order for that smartphone to have that ability. So it's not just what's on the phone, it's all of these other technologies that are out there that came together to assist us in that simple task. We take that simple task pretty much for granted. The amount of the benefit to humanity that has come as a result of all those technologies together is something that I encourage each one of you to just step back for a second and think about how cool that is and how much it makes your life a little bit better. Okay, so one of the things I want to do real quick is to talk about technology and where it comes from. And I think this might be interesting for you. I'm going to share my screen, 3 or 4 slides, a couple of cartoons, and I hope you like this. Share the screen. Here we go. Everybody see that okay? Nod your head. Nod your head. Very good. All right, so what we're seeing is a gentleman who's on the left and a gentleman who's on the right. The person who's on the left, this is a portrait painted by the gentleman on the right. And one of the things you'll notice about this portrait is that it is unfinished. You see the brush strokes around the face and the neck, the shoulders, the bust. And yet below that, you can see that you see canvas. This is an unfinished portrait. This is Lafayette. It's in the the early 1800s. The person who painted it is the person on the right. This person is Samuel Morse. Samuel Morse lived, he was born in 1791, lived in the 1800s. And many of you know that Samuel Morse is the person who invented, or is credited with having invented, the telegraph. The ability to communicate from one person to another place in another area was measured in terms of its speed by the speed of how fast a horse could run. When Samuel Morse painted this painting on the left, by the way, he was a portrait painter before he became an inventor. The reason he finished is because his painting was interrupted. A telegram came to him stating that his wife was ill. He was in Washington, his wife was in New York. And so he got a carriage and went as quickly as possible to New York so that he could tend to his ill wife. When he got there, she had passed already. She had ascended already. And he was distraught. And he was motivated through this distress to do something about the ability to communicate. By the time he had received word and by the time that he had traveled, it had been so long that he was not able to tend to his wife. And this was, and this became what we know now as the early telegraph. So this begets the concept of the acceleration of technical achievement and the advancement of disruptive technology. The ability to communicate in such a way that it could be done at the speed of light rather than the speed of a horse. This is the invention that he had patented. This is the telegraph itself. And what is interesting about this is that the first telegraph message was conducted on May 24th. And if many of you who have listened to conversations about the Bob, he revealed his mission as the announcer of the one whom God shall make manifest, the next prophet of God, Baha'u'llah. Early in the morning, he began on May 23rd, 1844, and that conversation continued to May 24th, 1844. That was the exact time and date. And simultaneously, or later that morning or that day, this message was transmitted on the telegraph. What hath God wrought? Which is actually a citation from the Bible, Numbers 23:23. He sent it between the Supreme Court chamber in the Capitol building into a place in Baltimore, B&O's Mount, I can't see it with the thing in the way, Mount Clair Station in Baltimore. All right, so this is an interesting change in human history, the ability to communicate at the speed of light overnight. Now, if we extrapolate from that, this chart sort of gives us an indication as to how telecommunications has been popularized over our history. And in this case, what we see is that the telegraph is not stated on here. It would be in the prior to 1860. And then the telephone is developed, the radio, the ability to transmit the radio so that others can hear essentially the speed of light, radio waves, then television, and then these other technologies that we all take for granted. You see the computer and the the mobile phone, and the World Wide Web. It's not the invention that's as important as adoption by humanity. There's lots of inventions that are sitting on a piece of paper someplace, but unless they are provided to humanity as a way of them for their use and to assist them in their lives, this process is a little use. And so the web, you see very early adoption within about 7 years or so, mass use of this technology, providing information across the globe. In addition, computing power has grown exponentially, and we think about the ability to compute the amount of computations that an insect could conduct, all the way through a human brain, and then the collective computation of all human brains and the timeline that we see there. And then you think about what does that computing, what does it afford us in terms of capability? This is an interesting illustration. Many of you have seen these swarms of drones put together in such a way that they can create artistic presentations in the sky. It's almost mind-blowing if you think about the technology that goes into these. The amount of communications, each one of these drones communicates with one another as well as with a station on the ground. The choreography of all of these working together without bumping into one another. You think about the amount of computational demand is needed in such a small little platform. And so again, and how do they navigate? They navigate through GPS. All of these technologies coming together for this kind of artistry, and it's art. There are other applications of this besides art that are useful to us. But this is an example of the encapsulation of many, many technologies and the evolution of all of those technologies shown in the prior illustration. Now, one of the things that we have to ask ourselves in terms of our ethics of advancing technology, which really wants to be the major portion of this conversation, is how do we use it? We have nuclear energy, which many can look at as good. We can power cities. We can also use nuclear energy in terms of a weapon to destroy cities. Stem cells for cell regeneration for the health and well-being of someone who is ill. And that there's a downside of that. Embryonic stem cells for use in meddling with creation of life. In economics, Keynesian economics versus consumption society, this is an area that we all struggle with today. We are given goods that we use in consumption, paper towels, for example, and many are saying maybe we should think about another way than using disposable goods. The internet spreads knowledge on the left side, and the internet spreads things other than knowledge on the right side. So there's always a good and a bad to these things when we advance technology. Socio-political evolution versus ruling by dictate. We have two very different worlds on the planet today. We have prosperity in our governance architectures where people are able to move freely, to engage in commerce, to engage in dialogue and in ideas. And then there are others where dictators do not permit so much freedom and do not permit so much progressive and the ability for humanity to determine their own path and their own destiny. Governance by people is something that democracy promises, modern democracy. And yet, if there's governance by people in such a way that abandons governance architectures, that could relate and permit anarchy. So there's pluses and minuses for each one of these things. And I think that's an area where we want to ask some of your questions. Last thing I'll say on this slide, and then I'll quit the slides, is I want to read this highlighted text. This is Abdul-Baha, son of Baha'u'llah, and he says this: science is the first emanation from God towards man. All created beings embody the potentiality of material perfection. But the power of intellectual investigation and scientific acquisition is a higher virtue specialized to man alone. It's a very different way of thinking that he has introduced about the ability for man to attain this ability of scientific acquisition and to use it for good, presumably. Further, he states, how shall we utilize these gifts and expend these bounties? And he answers the question by directing our efforts toward the unification of the human race. And so with that last admonition, we are given the instruction on how to deal with the ethical dilemmas of our ability to master the physical sciences and improve our condition. So we talked about innovation and the potential for good and the potential for not good. And I think in some cases, you could probably argue that people have done things with the intent to do good and have done bad. And so the question there is, what motivated somebody to do something, to come up with a clever idea, to introduce an innovation to humanity, and it was not used for good? And how could that be arrested as we go forward? How could we consider the principles of the spiritual characteristics and attitudes that might motivate us to make the right choices going forward in terms of how we use technology? And so I want to read this. A bit of this is reinforces the theme of man's ability to master the the physics of nature. Man, according to natural law, should dwell upon the surface of the earth. This is natural law, dwell upon the surface of the earth. But by overcoming this law and this restriction, the law of nature, he sails in ships over the ocean, mounts to the zenith in airplanes, and sinks to the depths of the sea in submarines. This is against the fiat of nature and a violation of her sovereignty and domain. This is Abdu'l-Baha writing. He continues to say, man, through his intellectual acumen, searches them out in the plane of the invisible laws of nature. He draws them into the plane of the visible, exposes and explains them. For instance, one of the mysteries of nature is electricity. According to nature, this force, this energy, should remain latent and hidden. But man scientifically breaks through the very laws of nature, arrests it, and even imprisons it for his use. Interesting choice of words. In brief, man, through the possession of this ideal endowment of scientific investigation, is the most noble product of creation, the governor of nature. This is a compliment to scientific exploration. But we must keep in mind that our ability to overcome the physical laws of the universe does not mean that we can do it at our demise or at the demise of somebody else. Advancing unity is a watchword that you provided in the prior illustration. He says this last point here, and then we'll move on to competition. He says, this endowment is the most praiseworthy power of man. For through its employment and exercise, the betterment of the human race is accomplished. The development of the virtues of mankind is made possible, and the spirit and mysteries of God become manifest. Therefore, I am greatly pleased with my visit to this university. This was a talk at Columbia University in New York in 1912. Praise be to God that this country abounds in such institutions of learning, where the knowledge of sciences and arts may readily be acquired. As much as a philosopher and a spiritual guiding light as Abdu'l-Baha was, he also encouraged the exploration of the sciences. But he also said that these have to work together, that they're working hand in hand. Okay, I want to move on to the concept of competition. Many companies, industries are motivated by competition. And I want to ask the question, What are the benefits of competition? And where do we see competition? Examples of this in nature and humanity, competition in war, for example, competition for resources. I want the resources. I'll compete with you for these resources. And so when you look at competition, you could argue that it is antithetical to a well-being humanity. The Universal House of Justice, which is an edifice that stands, a body that stands today in Israel at the Baha'i Holy Center, said this in 2013. They said, the vision of Baha'u'llah challenges many of the assumptions that are allowed to shape contemporary discourse. For instance, that self-interest drives prosperity, and that progress depends on the relentless competition. Much of our modern society believes that humanity is propelled forward through relentless competition. And the House of Justice is saying the new vision challenges this assumption. So let's explore what is the alternative to relentless competition. And I have a couple of other quotes. One is, this is from Abdul Baha. Prayer, sounds a little bit different, but we're going to come back to the idea of competition. Prayer is like the spirit, and material means are like the human hand. Prayer is of the spirit, and material means like the human hand. Further, the spirit operateth through the instrumentality of the hand. This is how they work together. Although the one true God is the all-provider, it is the earth which is the means to supply sustenance. Now, the reason for bringing this up is because we can see the concept of the spiritual attributes being combined with the physical attributes, okay? It's important that they come together. The spirit conceives and the hand does, okay? The intention should be the advancement of the world and the establishment of human civilization. A man of true knowledge and understanding will build public structures, that is, places that belong to all, houses of worship, schools to teach children, hostels for travelers, hospital. For every public building is a divine edifice, eternal and everlasting. All right. So this is the spirit that is motivating the hand that results in these edifices and the purposes that they attain. The future civilization envisioned by Baha'u'llah is a prosperous one in which the vast resources of the world will be directed towards humanity's elevation and regeneration. Baha'is conduct their lives in the midst of a society acutely disordered in its material affairs. All right? So the material affairs must be balanced through the spiritual condition of humanity. Now, one of the areas that we're faced with in our society today, and this is not just in this country, but we're seeing it in other countries as well, is where the social sciences and society are being pulled apart. And one of the things about innovation and competition that can be applied to social constructs is the innovation in how we think about one another, how we work cooperatively, not competitively with one another, and how this can be a basis of innovating how we work together and how we build together, societies build together. The Baha'i community has been engaged in an ongoing process of community building. Part of this means understanding the nature of the relationships that bind the individual, the community, and the institutions of society. One of the institutions of our society is our institution of commerce. This is where we go to work every day. This is where we attend meetings and we solve problems and we build things. We build cars, we build airplanes, we build things that advance our abilities. So that institution must be bound to the individual and the community. This is what is being proposed here. These three are actors on the stage of history who have been locked in a struggle, heretofore been locked in a struggle for power throughout time. Industry competes with communities and individuals. And individuals compete with industry and communities. So this is where we see competition that is pulling our fabric of society apart, not putting it together. In this context, the assumption that relations among them will inevitably conform to the dictates of competition, a notion that ignores extraordinary potential of the human spirit, has been set aside in the Baha'i dispensation. In the Baha'i conversation, competition has been set aside in favor of the more likely premise that their harmonious interactions can foster a civilization benefiting a mature humanity. I think what we've come to in terms of our society's material evolution, meaning the airplanes and the satellites and all these fancy things, running water, sanitation, there's a lot of things that are good that we have. But our ability to continue on that path will be stalled until we figure out how to cooperate and collaborate rather than compete. That is the next plateau of human existence, and we won't get there if we continue to compete. Animating the Baha'i effort to discover the nature of a new set of relationships among these three protagonists is a vision of a future society that derives inspiration from the teachings of Baha'u'llah. Okay, all right. That's a conversation about competition, but all is not lost when it comes to competition. Don't give up on competition just yet. The question that we should ask when it relates to competition is, if there are winners and there are losers, then everybody's a loser. The question is, how do we compete in a situation where everybody wins? Okay, is there a way that we can do that? And I think the answer is yes, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Turn the conversation from competition into a conversation vying for an alternative. Vie is a close match with compete, but it has a little bit of a different context. Webster says, vie means to strive for superiority, contend, compete, to wager, to hazard, and also to exchange in rivalry, to match. But a search of the word vie in the Baha'i writings will tell us this. This is the opposite of what we just talked about in terms of competition, but it does have the same meaning. Vie ye with each other in the service of God and of his cause. This is indeed what profiteth you in this world and in that which is to come, the world to come. Vie with each other in the service of God. So you and your buddy are sitting there and saying, I am going to begin a class for children, and I'm going to teach them the attributes of God so they have a stronger foundation of how to make these technological decisions when they get into a university. And his buddy sitting next to him says, I will do better than that. I will establish a forum for bringing those children together so that they can do exercises in developing technology so we can shape their young minds. And I will give them the practical aspects, and we'll see who goes farther and faster. Both of these are positive services to these young people, and the young people stand to benefit as a result. And so if you vie to compete for the betterment of humanity, everybody wins. And so this is the secret of competition. Abdu'l-Baha says, happy the soul that shall forget his own good, and like the chosen ones of God, vie with his fellows in service to the good of all, until strengthened by the blessings and perpetual confirmations of God, which is important. If you're not getting confirmations, you should probably rethink your strategy. But strengthened by those confirmations, he shall be empowered to raise this mighty nation up to its ancient pinnacles of glory and restore this withered land to sweet new life. And as a spiritual springtime, array those trees which are the lives of men with fresh leaves, the blossoms and fruits of consecrated joy. This is in a book called The Secret of Divine Civilization. So Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha encourage competition in a way that it benefits humanity. By the way, if competition benefits another, it is a selfless act. This is another test that you can apply to the concept of competition. If it is for self-promotion, it may not get the outcome you're looking for. If it is for the benefit of someone other than you, if it is selfless, then it probably will. Something to think about. Okay, so let's see, I think we want to have questions. I want to finish with this concept of truth. I've proposed some things for each of you to think about this afternoon. I would like you to think about those, and I would like you to think about them in the context of you discovering your own truth. And oftentimes when we believe something, it might be as a result of very little effort. And in the 18th century, Lord Byron said, adversity is the first path of truth, which I thought was interesting because sometimes the attainment of knowledge, of understanding, is not an easy path. It's a difficult path. And adversity is something that strengthens all of our understanding, resolve, our abilities. And this is repeated through the sages of history. When the human soul soareth out of this transient heap of dust and riseth into the world of God, then veils will fall away and verities will come to light, and all things unknown before will be made clear, and the hidden truths be understood. So the concept of innovation, what is good innovation? This is also a study of truth, that I encourage you to acquire the tools and exercise those tools to determine what is good for humanity and what is not, if you're in this field, or if you're in the field that, if you're working in a company that intends to innovate, what can you do to foster the ethical development of technology or innovation? And ask those questions. How does this benefit humanity? How does this benefit the personnel that are in our company? And use the concept of discovering truth as a tool in your ability to do that. Okay, with that, Bayan, I'll give the floor back to you and entertain any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Whalen, for your talk. We already have some questions. One of them asks, how should government regulation influence innovation, and how can the Baha'i community contribute to sound regulation without participating in party politics?
Yeah. Party politics is a road that you don't want to go down. It's just, there's no fruitful result. That's my view. Search that on your own. But I think we're seeing that, party politics is competition, and competition has a winner and a loser. And when there's a loser, everybody loses. So that's the thought process that I use for party politics. It is not a collaborative, cooperative environment. And so I generally, using those sort of theorems, I stay away from that. Now, the bigger question, how do you engage in discourse, is not easy, and it's not quick. But I would suggest that if we understand that discovering truth is not easy, as Lord Byron said, adversity is a prerequisite. And Abdu'l-Baha has plenty of remarks to make on the discovery of truth and how adversity helps steel our resolve and our ability to get there. One of the points that I would bring forward is the concept of consultation. And I would say Baha'i consultation is structured very methodically. It encourages as many stakeholder voices to come forward. No matter what your background is, if you are affected by an outcome of a thing, your voice is important to hear. It also encourages the introduction of supplication into an end result, supplication to God, to guide the discourse. This is something that that modern society is rejecting, let's be clear. And so introducing the idea of supplication to God in guiding the outcome of discourse is something that time will be our friend with. But those are two. The other one is, the other principle would be dispassionate introduction of your ideas, meaning you put an idea into a community of thought and you dispose yourself of that idea in terms of ownership, so that your ego is not engaged in the outcome based on your idea. These are principles in a dialogue, in an elevated dialogue that brings principles to the conversation. And these can be done in circles that are not politically charged, in government circles that are not politically charged. There's a lot of tactics that I think would be better for another conversation, another forum. However, I think that those elements have to be brought forward. Also, one of the elements is understanding that each person is affected by the outcome, and no one should be disenfranchised by an outcome of a decision, right? There's many principles of Baha'i consultation that should be studied and then engage in elevated conversations with these communities, government communities, and do so with these principles of consultation that I've mentioned. That's a simple answer. It's a lot more complex than that, admittedly.
Thank you. Another question asks, is not vying the same as competing? Would it not be better for the two to cooperate so that the kids will improve spiritually as well as physically?
Yes, yes, no doubt. Vie and compete are synonyms. They have a slightly different meaning, but in essence, in our conversation, they're synonyms. The reason I used vie is because I am looking for the conversation in the Baha'i writings, which are presumably a source of divine truth, what God intends for humanity, divine truth, so that I can understand where competition is useful and where it should be avoided. So whether you say vie or compete, for me, doesn't mean there's no difference, as you've pointed out. But where we compete has to have two characteristics. One is, it is done not for the benefit of myself. That's first. It's the benefit of humanity. And number two, if there's a loser, everybody loses. If you can apply those two rules, this is sort of Kelly's interpretation of the writings. If you can apply those two rules, then competition is good, because it results in collaboration. It results in cooperation. Competition is fun if you do it right.
Thank you. Another question asks, how can we protect and prevent ourselves from competition in service to the cause? I guess in a negative sense.
Yeah. In engaging in any activity, prayer tends to center one's soul. I think the speaker next week has spoken previously on the concept of prayer. Dariush Lame is going to be with you guys next week. I would encourage understanding more about the concept of prayer and how you practice prayer, meditation, emptying your mind, being mindful in terms of the results that come to you from prayer. It's not just an act, it's an experience. And so prayer is a good prerequisite in order to make sure that you are centered on your purpose. Second thing is define your actual purpose. Is your purpose to win a contest, which benefits yourself, or is your purpose to create something better for another? Now, be very careful, because you may convince yourself that you're doing something best for somebody else, when in actuality, your ego is engaged and you're doing something for your ego. So prayer and meditation will help you to put your ego in check and look for the divine blessings, the confirmations. When you're doing something and it doesn't feel right, perhaps this is your conscience telling you you're on the wrong track. If you do something and you see great benefits result after having prayed and meditated, asking for assistance, divine assistance, you will see what's called divine confirmations. You have to be open to it, but you'll see it. And that will tell you that your competition is for the betterment of humanity, not for the betterment of yourself.
Thank you. We have another question that asks, how do concepts like detachment and moderation apply to the pursuit of innovation and success in a competitive world?
Detachment and moderation. That's a tough one. And the reason I say it's a tough one, because when I look at the Golden Gate Bridge, I see this enterprise that created this massive edifice that enabled people to move, goods to move, and people to drive, and and all of these things. And this is an edifice that has use to humanity, that came as a result of many people coming together with an intense passion, design beauty, functional excellence, structural integrity, safety, these kinds of things, overcoming all of the laws of nature, water, gravity, distance, all of these things, time, condensation, moisture that wants to rust things. There's many things, sciences, that come into play when you're doing something so grand of an enterprise. The grand enterprise is always best when someone puts their passion into it. It's hard to combine detachment and passion. And so, on one hand, I'll say that the greatest achievements have been made with inspiration. I think where you get into detachment is where you get into the ability for communities to come together with having a passionate resolve to accomplish something. And for the ability for one person to detach themselves from a particular thought or opinion with the idea, the belief, the fundamental belief that the whole can come up with better ideas than the individual, right? So collective decision-making produces an outcome that is better than the individual, no matter how passionate they are. So I think that there's nuances in how to dial passion and detachment. Does that make sense? It's a very good question.
Thank you. Another question asks, what advice would you give to Baha'i youth or entrepreneurs seeking to innovate while upholding spiritual principles in their professional lives?
Yeah. Be a protagonist for good. Be clear on the objectives. When you enter into a company, study the mission statement. When you develop your own company, be mindful of your mission statement. Craft it in a way that it's unambiguous and it serves a purpose. Every mission statement should serve a purpose. But ask yourself, ask your company, or the company that you work for, if that purpose benefits the stakeholders, all of the stakeholders. And again, there can't be a winner and a loser there. Our shareholders are our stakeholders. They, blah, blah, blah. That's not enough. You have to benefit employees. You have to create an environment that is equitable for people to work within, and it's a great place to work. The product that you produce or the service that you produce benefits humanity. Doesn't benefit part of humanity at the expense of another part of humanity, but benefits anyone who participates in your whatever ecosystem that you are involved in. Right. So if you can stand up to some of those principles, if your company or what you're looking for can stand up to those principles, then you're on a pretty good track. Now, the question will be when the company deviates from that somehow, and it happens a lot. For what resolve do you have in order to engage in a dialogue that corrects that deficiency? And this takes patience, and it takes heart, and it takes care, it takes love. It doesn't take competition. You don't go to the boss and so you can have an argument and say, I'm right and you're wrong. And the mission statement is my proof. This is not useful because there's a winner and a loser. You engage in a conversation with the boss, whoever the boss is, the CEO, whoever it is, and say, can we talk about this? Because I'm concerned that, this beautiful mission statement that says we're going to do these great things for humanity, that we're not on a good foundation. Can we talk about it? And engage in an elevated conversation about what can I do to enable that mission? Because I feel like we're on the wrong track. And if it doesn't look like it's going to go well, then you got to vote with your feet. Get out. Work for a noble profession, a noble organization.
Thank you.
Also, sorry, one more thing. If you're the CEO of that organization, you have to be willing for somebody to come forward and say, hey, I think we're off track. You have to let down your personal bias and be willing to listen to somebody else. You have to be willing to engage in a consultative dialogue with those people that have an opinion about that and learn from it. That's hard when you're the boss.
Another question is asking, what are your thoughts on sports and the Olympics, etc.? How does a competition factor into these things?
I think that sports, I like baseball, I like the competition, the spirit of competition. I do see where individual accomplishment is celebrated more than team accomplishment. And so there is cognitive dissonance in the concept of professional sports. One of the things that I like about the Olympics is that all the nations come together. In and of itself, this is an outcome that brings joy to me. I cannot watch an opening ceremony of any Olympics without almost coming to tears, because all of the nations come together, all the people come together. The athletes embrace one another. There is true love for humanity when we see these ceremonies, the opening ceremony, the closing ceremony, the lifelong friendships that emerge from these people all across the world, one to another. And so I think that to answer that question, look at the good that comes of it. If there is no good, then abandon it. If there is good, then romance that good. Do more of that good. Baseball brings kids to the ballpark and they eat ice cream and hot dogs. They have fun. All of the fans are together. There's a rivalry. This guy hits the ball into the stands and the opposite fans throw the ball back and say, we're not going to recognize your home run. I think it's fun. It's goofy. It's fun. Individual athlete celebrations, I don't find appealing, because I think they focus the attention on themselves rather than their attention on the fans, the industry, the fun, bringing people together, things of that nature. So I think within competition, you can find good, but individual competition for one person to be superior over another, where there's a winner and loser. I think that should be looked at closely. And I realize what I'm saying has some dissonance in it, but I think it's for each to find their way on that.
Thank you. Another question is asking, how did you hear about the Baha'i faith and why did you choose to become a Baha'i?
I heard about the Baha'i faith from my mother, who became a Baha'i when I was about 4 or 5 years old. So in essence, I was raised as a Baha'i youth. And although my mom sent me to church and said, you got to do it the hard way. I've told you things about the Baha'i faith, but you got to make your own choice. And the only way you can make your own choice is you have to investigate other forms of thought. So she told me to go talk to my chums at school and say, where do you go to church? And get an invitation. So I went to 2 or 3 churches. I did not go to a synagogue at the time. There wasn't a synagogue that I could get to. It was a small town in the Midwest. I didn't go to a mosque. I didn't go to any other temple because it was a relatively strong, Baptist-y kind of community that I lived in. So later I had to go study the other religions. But in essence, I think the influence of my mother, also my spiritual mother, was what weighed on me the most. And I ultimately went to my parents when I was 17 and said, hey, I think I figured it out. So I'd like to formally make my declaration. And they looked up from the table and said, oh, okay, all right, that's good. They were happy. But, that was sort of my path. But admittedly, I had strong influence by Baha'i parents.
Thank you. Well, that looks like it's all the questions we have today. So I want to thank you so much again, Mr. Whalen, for this talk. It's actually something that me and some of my friends were talking about in a study circle recently about the role of competition and just, in fact, many of these questions covered things we were discussing. So I have a lot to go back to my friends with, new, fresh insights. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So our speaker next week is going to be Mr. Daryush Lamy, and his topic is Martyrdom of the Bab. What are the secrets and types of martyrdom? And again, these talks occur every Saturday at noon Eastern time, so you can invite your friends and family. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith, or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that I will put in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you all next Saturday. Have a great week.